I'm joined today by Sonia Wearne. Good morning, Sonia. Thank you for joining me today.
Good morning.
Sonia Wearne has a wide range of experience since having developed a career in childcare and play work over the past 20 years. Sonia has become a parent of a child who has been diagnosed with early developmental trauma, sensory processing disorder, attachment and fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum. Question 1.
How has your role as a parent differed from your professional experiences, Sonia?
Dramatically is one way of describing it, I guess. As a play worker, I'd worked with so many different children with a lot of diverse needs, quite often being a one-to-one myself. And so when we went down the adoption pathway, I thought I'd be fine, that I had enough experience to see me through. And to be honest, that was the view of a lot of the social workers and the team that was supporting the adoption process. And then when my son landed on my doorstep, I suddenly realised that I was in the deep end without a float, because everything that I knew or I'd learned just completely changed, which meant that as a parent, I had to kind of re-educate myself, retrain myself, go back to the drawing board, really. Yeah, so, challenging behaviour, or you can say behaviours that challenge, has always been something that, as a play worker, I was passionate about. I always kind of made a beeline for those children because I found that the most rewarding part of my job was to help those children within the setting that were struggling. Quite often sort of teachers would say to us as play workers when we were picking up from school, gosh, you've got a lot of challenging children coming to you. But to be honest, I never really saw them as a challenge, because if you put the right kind of support and plans in place for them and give them the support they need, they don't have to necessarily be challenging.
Great. And I suppose it's reflecting on both of those roles, isn't it?
Question 2.
Your role as a parent is very different to a play worker in a setting, and the challenges are seen differently. How would you compare both of those roles?
Yeah, so as a play worker, you're there to do a job. You have a time limit, so at 6 o'clock you're out of there, and you can kind of put that to bed and forget about it till you pick them up again the next day. You also have a team around you. You have support. You've got policies and procedures that kind of guide you and show you the way that you potentially should go. They don't always maybe work, and sometimes it's important to understand that and know that those policies and procedures have to be living documents that change and develop depending on the children you have in your setting. As a parent, however, it's 24/7. Within my house, there was stuff going on I didn't really want to admit to people, because feeling out of control or at a loss, and feeling like you couldn't be a parent to a particular child anymore was a really difficult thing to kind of come to terms with. And as a parent, you can have something called compassion fatigue as well. You get worn out, because if you're parenting children with those challenging behaviours, or for example, my son is very hypervigilant, because that child is hypervigilant, as a parent you also have to be hypervigilant, and it's a struggle, it's tiring, it's wearing, and you've got to come to a point where you recognize that you can't do it on your own, that you've got to kind of talk about those experiences and get help.
Yeah, definitely.
Question 3.
So what do you feel influences the expectations of behaviour?
Everything we know and everything we think, our assumptions, our values, can only ever be based on what we've experienced or lived ourselves. So my value system would very much depend on how I was brought up as a child, what I was told was right, wrong, how I should behave, it all stems on those outward influences in my life. So when dealing then with other people's children, you know, you hear people say it all the time, oh, if I'd done that when I was young, I wouldn't have got away with that. Or, you know, we have those expectations. How we view behaviour is very much personal to each and every one of us, which is why when working in a setting with a team of people, you have to be very mindful of how each other views behaviour, what each other finds acceptable, what pushes our buttons, if you like. For example, some people won't let children swear. For other people, it's just a word. They're just expressing themselves. And as a team, you've got to be on the same page as well. So as play workers, it's very important to know each other really well, to know your boundaries, your limitations, what you can tolerate, but also making sure that what's in your policies, what your rules are for your setting, is agreed and adhered to by everybody. Because also with children, we all know consistency and routine is really important. With a child like with my son, if you give him an inch, the saying is he'll take a mile. So if today you're not allowed to put the Play-Doh in with the cars, but tomorrow Anne comes in and she says, yeah, carry on, and then I come back and say no, that child's going to be confused and they're going to be thinking, well, I was allowed to do it yesterday, what's going on here? And then has a sense of distrust. The parent of a child with additional needs, I've had to look at behaviour completely differently. Whereas to be honest, we all think we're in control, and that as adults in the playwork setting, we can control the children within it, that's our role, that we need to have a handle on everything to make sure everybody's safe. But what I quickly learned is that the only person I can control is myself, that we actually can't control children. Children will express themselves through behaviour, and how we view that behaviour is critical. So if we take behaviour, for example, as a personal insult, if a child comes up to you and says, you know, I hate you, they don't really mean they hate you. What they're saying is something's happened and they don't like it and they feel uncomfortable. So what I've had to do is look at behaviour as not a choice of a child or us as adults, because we're all the same, but rather a reaction to something else that's going on emotionally. And it made me really curious about the underlying factors surrounding different situations in people's lives as well, because we all walk different journeys, we all have different paths. And my coping mechanism's always been to throw myself into research. So if I'm struggling with a situation, I've got to go read about it. I've got to go find out about it. I've got to go and see who's written something about it, what's going on. That's my coping mechanism.
Question 4. What have you learned so far from your research?
So through that, I learned a lot about trauma. I learned a lot about attachment. I learned a lot about therapeutic parenting and PACE, which is what I use in my house now. Because what I loved about PACE was that it's a very play-worky style anyway. And I had to do a lot of soul searching myself to understand why I react the way I react to different things. I had to re-examine my assumptions and attitudes and kind of reframe them. And alongside that, I had a lot of therapy to support me to survive. And I also learned that control and power in secret grows. And so the only way to gain control is by admitting when we're struggling with things or we don't know the answer. And saying, do you know what, today I can't cope with this. You're going to have to deal with this. And no one can do it on their own.
No, it's a team approach, especially in a setting, definitely. And it's that team around the child at home as well, isn't it? So, yeah,
Question 5.
So how has your understanding and view around the subject of behaviour changed within your experiences?
As I said, I've just had to reframe everything I knew. And there's a really great resource out there called Beacon House. They've got a website, beaconhouse.org.uk, and within that there's loads and loads of resources. But they talk about the hidden needs iceberg. So when we see a behaviour, be that controlling, aggressive, distant, rude, or on the other side, very happy, compliant, underneath there's a whole load of stuff going on. And as adults, we need to support the child to get to know the child, to understand what's going on under the surface in order to understand those reactions that we're seeing. So, for example, if you come into work or a child comes into your setting, maybe to breakfast club, and they're angry and cross and throwing things around, and you're like, well, they're going to be difficult today. Actually, if you unpick it, what might be going on is mum and dad have been in a rush. They haven't given them breakfast, so the child might be hungry. Or mum and dad had an argument and that's playing in their head and they're thinking adults can't be trusted. So I've come in here and you're bossing me around, but today can't deal with you. Or, they might just be really angry, frustrated, or sad about something. Anything could have happened on the way in. And getting to know those children, building really good relationships with them so that you can identify what's, I say, normal for a child and what's out of character for a child is really, really important. Parent, I've been on the receiving end of having my child excluded. I've been on the receiving end of being a parent who's working, who's using a setting for childcare because I need to work. And then when I get to work, my phone's ringing. Can you come? Because this and this and this has happened and we just can't deal with this today. And then I've got all that stress of, but I've got hours to do. I've got meetings to rearrange, getting from work to the setting to pick them up. And hearing all that negative stuff about my child really affected my relationship with the settings, because as a parent I was always open and honest. Whenever I enrolled my son anywhere, I went through his trauma, I went through his triggers. In the end, and it sounds a bit over the top, but I had a little manual on him, a little profile about him. And if you see him doing this, this is what's going on, and these are the things that can help him. And I shared that tool with the people who attended the session, because I felt that if they knew, they could respond and it would be all right, because I can do it at home. I can manage his behaviour at home. So why can't everyone else do it? And now he's in a setting where, we share decisions together. They might ring me up, but it's not to say, come get him. It's notice that he's doing this, this and this today. And I'll say, right, well, he normally does that when he's hungry, or if he goes jumper on, maybe he's too hot, and we problem solve and work things together.
Question 6. So what is key for play workers?
So is key for play workers is, if you can, build that relationship with the parents. Get as much information about the children as you can, because the more you know about that child, the more you can kind of understand and support them. When I did my childcare training, we learned a lot about attachment theories, but we never really learned about what happens when a child doesn't have a positive attachment. So we learned about the importance for them, but we never kind of were taught about what happens, when they don't have that positive attachment.
Question 7. How does this then impact upon the children?
So those children who are not nurtured, who are neglected, grow up with a different kind of inner working model to us. So a child that's nurtured knows they're loved. They know that if they do X, Y, and Z, it doesn't matter because their parent still loves them. But a child who hasn't had that nurture, they might break something and think, well, I'm unlovable, I'm naughty, everything's my fault. So if I've done that, that's it. Understanding where a child's at and how they view themselves is also extremely important.
Yeah, I think that can be developed in a setting as well. You know, those relationships and those attachments can form in a setting, especially an after school club where children may start when they're 3, 4, 5. And still be there at 12 years of age and longer. Those relationships will form with consistency and building that attachment, and it can be consistent for the child. So that's great.
Question 8.
So what do you feel is the main consideration for understanding a wide range of children's behaviour?
So first of all would be for me is to get to know that child, know their background, know their narrative. For a lot of us, if we've never dealt with a child who's been adopted, for example, we might fear that and we might find that quite scary. But by understanding their narrative and knowing how the parents talk about their adoption journeys, for me, he's always known he's adopted. We talk about it. We have his tummy mummy, and then he has us as his mum and dad. Knowing the narrative, knowing how the parents at home talk about it so that you can support the children when they've got questions. Learning to respond rather than react. So it's very easy for something to happen and for us to just automatically react to it.
Question 9. So what advice would you give to a play worker?
There's a guy who I read a lot about called Brian Post. He's an American therapeutic counsellor, and he's got a book called From Fear to Love, and he talks about the power of the pause, and he says count to 10 and choose love. Try to disassociate yourself from the actual behaviour and connect with the child and try and work out. So this child just got really angry and thrown the bricks across the room. And try and work out what's going on for that child rather than punishing them for what they've done. Try and work out why they've done it. Control, understand we can't control anybody but ourselves, and trust is really important. The child has to learn to trust you, and a child's only going to trust you from building a consistent relationship with you.
Question 10. What do you feel is important?
So I talked about earlier about how routine and consistency is really important within the setting, and understanding behaviour as communication, and knowing your expectations, knowing what you can cope with and what you can't cope with, knowing what the rest of the team can cope with and can't cope with. If you come into work and you're just not feeling okay, in my team, it would be like, oh, I've had a really bad day. Okay, do you want to go and prepare a snack then? And I'll get all the busyness of the children out of the way so you can just have 5 before we start. Deciding if you need to react to something, if a child's done something and there's no safety concerns or no one else is at risk, is it worth the challenge? I talked in the session about PACE, which is a theory that Dan Hughes came up with, standing for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Sometimes we just need to be really playful with children because that can then distract it from kind of snowballing. If a child is kicking off, as long as everyone else is safe, don't crowd them, just give them space, helping them to feel safe, showing them that you are a trusted adult, because not all adults are safe for all children.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sonia. It's been very interesting to talk to you and very informative also. Have you got anything else you'd like to add or anything you'd like to talk about?
No, only just to keep going because, as play workers, you do an amazing job. And, we are about building relationships and just remembering relationships key really, and just learn to get to know yourself, your children, your staff, and try to learn to respond rather than react. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much.